This is the Average Guy Network, and you have found Cyber Frontiers, show number 48, recorded on September 10th, 2018. Here in Cyber Frontiers, we explore cybersecurity, big data, and the technologies that are shaping the future. If you have questions, comments, or contributions, we'd love to hear from you. You can send me an email, jim@theaverageguy.tv. Although, maybe way more productive if you just send those over to Christian. And that's super easy, Christian@theaverageguy.tv. You can find me on Twitter @JCollison or Christian @Borg Whisper. Yes, that's what it is, Borg Whisperer. TheAverageGuy.tv, powered by Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people you know and you trust. Perfect, actually, for podcasters. Both web and media hosting can cost as little as $10 a month to get, yes, both of those. And they're actually both optimized just for podcasters. Although Christian can really do anything. So if you got some questions, send him an email or go out and visit maplegrovepartners.com, and he'd love to chat with you. If you haven't subscribed yet, do that on your device of choice, whether you're on an iPhone or an Android device, or if you're on your laptop or your computer, whatever. There's all kinds of ways to subscribe. Get that done so you get these automatically, because we don't do them on a regular basis. Christian is back with me, and Christian, good to see you. Welcome back.
Yeah, thanks. It's good to be back.
How are things?
Things are well. We are not hunkering down, but certainly preparing to weather the week-long rainy effects of Florence and otherwise. So it's a somber time in my life for seasonal weather. But
I've heard in the news this is the judgment for the East Coast being,
I guess so,
just the bed of sin and debauchery.
I mean,
so that's what I read that on the news. Isn't that what isn't that what the fake news is all about? Anyways, we've got fake news kind of listed as the first topic we want to go through, and I think we know a lot. We hear that word being thrown around. I think it's really only been in the last maybe 2 years, Christian, right? That it's being thrown around. There are maybe you'll have a different angle when we think about fake news.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of an interesting topic, especially because so much of our political dialogue and discourse as of late is centered around political cyber and fake news, and trying to define what it means to be fake news. And interestingly, there are several domains we've talked about on this show where AI outperforms humans at doing things. And some of the recent research out of the University of Michigan shows that fake news is better detected by computers than humans by about 6%. So you have your average learning algorithm can identify a fake news article accurately 76% of the time, compared to humans, which can do it 70% of the time. And I just find this whole topic fascinating, because the very algorithm that we are worried about, which is how do things end up getting ranked, like which content matters more than not, which content is factually accurate versus opinionated. We are now also using algorithms and automated approaches to try and debunk our algorithms. So it's kind of like a weird way of doing functional testing of machine learning algorithms as far as humans see them. And it's the whole field is kind of awkward and bizarre, because it has become this new machine learning problem that people are clearly digging into. Personally, I think it is very much in the fad stage right now. There's not really a lot of science behind it to tell us that empirically fake news is going to be an increasing problem over the long term. I think it's pretty easy to make the argument over the short term that it's going to increasingly be used, but there's a lot of counterpoles to how people are using data on the internet that suggests that the effect of fake news or misleading articles could diminish over time as people become more self-aware of what they're reading on the internet. And just the old adage that if I read it on the internet, it must be true. I think that's how most people have operated when gathering information on the internet for a predominant part of its history. But I think we are now starting to move in an era where people will be far more cautious about how they are digesting that information, and what algorithms they do or do not allow them to influence what they learn and what their decision making is. And, it's ironic in the sense that, I remember in school, and I'm pretty sure anyone who, was awake in middle school and high school and college and so forth, um, they beat it down your throat for years on end about doing good academic research involves getting strong citations, right? And going through all the hoops to say that you didn't plagiarize something because you properly cited it, but also that your information was good because you cited it from a credible source. And so this whole fad of fake news really is talking about the velocity at which we dump new ideas and they go viral on the internet. But the concept of trying to do proper information gathering and citation has, been around since the internet started, but it wasn't the cool, sexy thing to talk about. In academia, it was very much about writing a credible research paper or taking a credible position, and increasingly so as print materials became less and less of a predominant primary source for people authoring original research. It more and more came to, okay, how do we properly adapt these mechanisms for online news and internet sources and research papers and so forth, as opposed to in print. And so I think we are just remarrying ourselves to old concepts within the modern confines of the political and um, intellectual reactions to algorithms basically telling us what we do and do not want to see.
Christian, with when we think about confirmation bias, I mean that's so strong in the sense that fake news goes both ways. It's written to really oftentimes reinforce a confirmation bias in someone and have them continue down that path or continue down stronger or influence those around them to get that done. What I mean, it just seems like that works so well. What will it take for the population in general to discredit that and to rely on more reliable resources? And it just seems like no matter what, people just continue to fall for that. And I well, you allude to it may get we may see less of it. I don't see an end in sight. It's just crazy.
Yeah, I mean, so again, it's like we're fighting algorithms with algorithms to try and combat this problem right now. So, one of the really interesting science experiments on this right now is a website called Nowhere News, spelled KNOW HERE news.com. So it's like the know, like I know something, combined with the word where. They both share that W, and then the word news, all in one domain. The whole point of the website is they claim that they use a combination of learning algorithms and people upvoting or downvoting the level of bias in an article to create a news feed that is essentially completely, um, in theory, bias free, right? So, unlike a Google News or something similar where your preferences and your filters get set very quickly, this site kind of prides itself on being something where it reports newsworthy items but doesn't present them within an opinionated or biased slant to the left, right, or otherwise. And so because the problem of what we call fake news or opinionated commentary or otherwise happens at the speed of computing, having a human response to a speed of computing problem is a uh, unfillable prophecy, right? So I think that's the justification for why we're answering our own algorithms with more algorithms. That said, it's just like it's very unproven to assert the success criteria for identifying something as fake or biased, it is equally as hard to prove the opposite, which is that something is not. So, you know, it's a very opinionated thing right now to look at something like Nowhere, which is what they call themselves, and say definitively whether or not you feel what you're reading is has any type of non-factual basis to it. But outside of that, having algorithms determine that is still very much a rules definition and a feature-based approach, and they're relying on kind of feedback data of humans saying yes or no to how much they find the story to be impartial or not. They're relying on that as the feedback mechanism to improve their learning algorithm, right? So in essence, the website is a giant self-supervised or a semi-supervised learning model. An interesting thing that they do in addition to the impartiality score is they show you what's called a source trust ranking, and they rank the quality of the sources that are referenced in the article, or have been referenced to it, which again reminds me very much of the old classic times of, the biggest junky website of any college student or high school student was easybib.com, which is where basically you put that URL in that had the thing you wanted to cite and automatically wrote the MLA citation for you to jam into your paper. This source trust ranking system they came up with is more or less very, very similar in concept, where they're basically ranking based on the trustworthiness of the source whenever it's referenced in the article, or whenever that source references, it's bi-directional reference from what I understand. So, I'm just looking at one of these articles about the Justice Department on the website, and if you scroll down, it has 16 source trust rankings that are in there, where the most trustworthy reference is from MarketWatch, and the least trustworthy reference is from Breitbart, and it kind of ranks from A to Z based on I think the political lean of the source, how trustworthy it is, right? So I think their concept here is that MarketWatch doesn't really have any political skin in the game, whereas Breitbart is a very well-defined political category. So kind of an interesting approach. I have yet to see if sites like this are going to catch on, but it certainly goes without saying that as we're seeing social media kind of have a giant hiccup right now, I think we will see this topic extend to how we use social media platforms or don't use social media platforms, because I think we really did saturate and peak with the initial user base of social media, and some of the reactions we're seeing to how people's technology and data are getting misused, combined with how people perceive the agenda of a particular platform for them, may radically influence a potential future niche of people coming up with new niche social or news sources like Nowhere to try and claim to provide impartiality and verifiably non-leaning places to talk to others and learn information. And so if anyone thought information science was dead as a field, I think this is very much where information science may start to trend towards, once you get past kind of the classic concepts in information science.
My daughter, of course, studying journalism at the, at Northwest Missouri State, and it's an interesting time to be a journalist as well. And what actually, what actually gets written. It's funny when I hear her talk, she's trying to follow all the rules. She's taught these journalism rules about what they can and can't write, and keeping bias out, and citing your sources and or not, based on confidentiality and all those things. And she feels very strong about the future of journalism and where it's going and what it's doing. And yet there's all this churn around the technology around it, and around algorithms now appearing to go after each other. So you got algorithms creating the news in some cases, then you have other algorithms trying to determine if that's fake news or not, and then there's probably algorithms to fake out the fakes from the fakery of, and it seems like it's gonna maybe get a little ridiculous before it gets better. Like we're gonna science the crap out of this thing. We're gonna computer science the crap out of this thing before people go, maybe we should just report the truth. You know?
Yeah, well, absolutely. And it's like holding humans accountable, I think,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
not going to be the scientific validation point here, but um, it's really not clear to me what the acceptance criteria is yet for saying whether or not we have gotten ourselves out of this problem. Um, I think it is going to be a growing problem, but both a crisp and concise problem statement and um, what is the end goal, really not clear to me right now, but clearly stuff like this is popping up, so people are thinking about it.
No.
um and I already see links on here for our membership program, so it says it's free, interestingly, but
Well, it's got levels, right? And
so it's got levels based on how you engage with the site, which kind of makes sense because I think that's how they have to have people engaging with the editorial portion of the site in order for them to get the feedback mechanisms that they get for ranking the articles properly. So um, whether or not this turns into like a paid journal at some point, I have no idea. But certainly they're trying to crowdsource the data model right now, which is quite interesting.
it is interesting. Be something interesting to follow. I'll bookmark it. I signed up for it and bookmark it. And I don't have a good place right now I really go to. I've been viewing the news mostly on the app on my iPhone. There's the news section there, and it comes from a variety of sources that,
Right.
sometimes I kind of chuckle at, like, can I even can I even read this?
Yeah, well,
But
same thing, right? It's like, how many people who own iPhones bother to take the time to go into the news app and figure out how to
right.
customize the sources that they want? And are the defaults that are set, how can you say with any great, I'm looking at my iPhone right now. I get top stories, I get trending, and I get top videos. Well, the top stories are from PBS NewsHour and Fox News. The trending is from Vanity Fair and what does that say? People magazine. And the top videos is from USA Today.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I guess, but
And it looks like you're seeing exactly the same thing I'm seeing.
oh
Like,
yeah,
so we probably have not customized our news app at
right,
all. Yeah.
right. And
Yeah.
so then I, click it up, and the first thing I get humorously, personalize your news, improve your reading experience by following your favorite channels and topics. So it's waiting for me to pick what channels and things I'm interested in before it down selects. And so maybe the the joke is on me for not doing this first, but I scroll through here and I see everything from Vox to Slate to Men's Health to TechCrunch. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff in here, but there's not really, I don't know. It very much reminds me of Twitter in the sense that all bad experiences with Twitter start when you first create your account and you pick 5 followers, and then it forever starts sending you down the winding road of followership from the first 5. It like forever embeds like, oh, you must be interested in this for the rest of your life. And it takes basically quite some time of, following and doing other things to start changing that algorithm's opinion. But um, it's also not clear to me. Do we know if the news app that's on here is provided by Apple or is it someone else?
I do not know.
I believe it's an Apple
I
app.
think it is.
Could be wrong. But I'm kind of curious how they see the problem in the perspective because same thing. I feel like this is one of the apps that kind of everyone just assumes and takes for granted on their iPhone, but
Mhm.
I don't know how many people really take seriously doing any kind of customization with it. So,
Yeah, there's some sources that are just awful.
oh, they're
I mean,
terrible.
Vanity Fair is one of the worst offenders in
Yeah.
there, and you just like, oh my gosh, come on, people! Just the clickbait. I mean, we're not even talking about the lean or the bias or the fake news. Just the clickbait. I mean, it's like clickbait 101 on some of these
Yeah.
articles.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it reminds me of, just our culture becoming the BuzzFeed culture, right? And like everything is like there has to be some instant gratification at the end of at the end of reading the article that reinforces your worldview. And it's funny because it kind of reminds me of the same achievement scenario in video games, right? There's this whole science behind how humans become addicted to games, and one of the biggest mechanisms in which people start down that path is the achievement complex, which is like, oh, you know, I do this hard thing, and I'm rewarded in some way in the game, and that is what allows me to just start, moving deeper and deeper. We are starting to get that way with news, where it's like, if that wasn't a satisfying article that reinforced my worldview, like I have to keep reading and looking for another one that's a better clickbait. So, I don't know what people are looking for on the other end of it, but certainly from if we step back for a second and say, what is the objective computer science thing to do here? There's certainly much to be said for how AI and machine learning are playing a role in influencing this content. And in terms of unexplored research areas, in my opinion, very little test frameworks or validation theories being postulated for how to accurately classify and assess this type of information, which again, it's one of these things I'm torn about because I don't see the problem going away soon, but I'm not sure it's the right problem to be solving yet. It's like try not to take a hammer to every single problem in life. It's like, do we need to really start sifting and building these huge learning algorithms and data models to fix a very human generated problem?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure. I think the fact that the problem happens at the scale of computing from a virality perspective makes me think yes, but the fact that we've gone from 0 to 200% on this kind of topic is usually a red flag for me saying this is a giant fad. So I don't know if it's going to plateau to any kind of reasonable area where there's long-term value in solving these problems.
Yeah, no. Good enough. Let's switch topics. You got an interesting one here. There was a TV show called Person of Interest that was out.
Yes.
Probably
what a great show.
A decade ahead of its time. Most of that technology is showing up, at least in the mainstream right now. But it's this whole idea of just facial recognition being everywhere because cameras are everywhere. And then a computer trying to trying to protect people or solve crimes. I actually never, that's funny. That is a show I should have watched a lot of because it had a lot of tech in it and I never did. But let's talk about the real world. Are we seeing more of this coming?
Yeah, so I mean, actually, it's not as much of a switch as we think because the algorithms it's a switch in topics of how AI is becoming a pervasive part of our society. But if it's not reading news, it's travel now. So the hot thing this month was that Dulles Airport in Northern Virginia has rolled out facial recognition for boarding. And so the concept here is they stipulate that they basically keep the facial recognition data for up to 2 weeks, and they use it to speed up boarding the flight and doing things to get through security. And basically, they take a lot of steps to show how they're being privacy conscientious. One, with the data retention policy. Two, they've done quite a bit to look into how to properly notify passengers and give them a very clear guidelines of like how the technology is being used, why it's being used, etc. And by and large, I think people are already so used to the fact that when they go through the airport, there's a lot happening them with respect to rights or not rights to privacy and the whole security apparatus associated with getting on a plane. But interestingly, a quick win for this whole concept was that 3 days in, they caught their first suspected imposter using facial biometrics. So it really didn't take long to justify the program from the perspective of, again, humans are not as accurate in dealing with imposter syndrome as computers are, apparently. much like Facebook is 5% more accurate at telling you what friends you do and don't recognize than you are. So it's another area where AI is starting to outperform us in our daily lives. And it's quite interesting because I think um, we are getting to a place where it might not be long before they don't even ask you for your driver's license at the airport. Like, we are moving to a model where once your face is in the database, once your biometric is in the database, you walk in, once you get within a certain perimeter of the terminal, you're automatically starting this kind of digital onboarding process to making sure that you're there for a legitimate reason. And you might laugh at this, but biometric onboarding is happening in stuff as benign as food. And it sounds ridiculous, but it only took me to get to my junior year of college to discover that we switched to all biometrics in the cafeteria. I kid you not. You could not get food at any Maryland diner without swiping your hand through a biometric entry point. And so they did away with all the student ID cards. They enrolled every single student's fingerprints, and if you wanted to get food, you had to swipe your hand. It was a horizontal swipe. So you'd walk up to the turnstile, you'd take your 5 fingertips, and you'd wipe it across the laser, basically, and in you would go to the cafeteria. And it's like, well, that sounds like a lot of high tech for a little yield. Actually, it was super high yield because it used to take forever to get food because cashiers were slow, they were inaccurate, they were inefficient, they were having problems with theft. When they switched to the all you could eat buffet style, where it was like, once you're behind the turnstile, you're good to go, we've charged and credited you. Game changer, because you couldn't back up the line checking out and you couldn't back up the line going in because there was nothing to check. It was just either the turnstile worked or it didn't. If you hopped the turnstile, it would go off. If typical things with turnstile security, right? But suddenly biometrics made it way better of a situation to get something as simple as food, which is humorous because I think a lot of people are super nervous about, especially with the use case of Maryland, right? Where it only took them about a semester of me being there on campus before all social security numbers going back to the early 90s were lost. So I, of course, didn't have high confidence when we started claiming we were going to roll out biometrics on campus. That was kind of a red flag for me. But I mean, this is the reality of where we're going with these learning algorithms, and biometrics is becoming an increasingly powerful area where we can do a lot with the datagrams to get an outcome that we want at scale.
In the article we'll post in the show notes, they say this spring Lufthansa announced that it boarded an A380 with over 350 passengers at LAX in less than 20 minutes, less than half their normal time, using self-boarding gates linked to CBP's facial enabler traveler verification service. No more fumbling with your boarding pass while you have 2 carry-ons, maybe a kid. No more trying to find your QR codes or trying to refresh your screen. we we all know what that's like. If you're a traveler and you get up there, you've had your phone, you've been touching it to keep the screen on. Why can't that screen just stay on? Like, it's your freaking boarding pass, right? Anyways, you're refreshing it. You get distracted for a second. You get up there. It's I got to turn. I got to sign back in. I got and it's just a mess, right? I mean, I really do love this idea of if they can get it right and it works, yeah, it'd be a lot better to not have to just flag it when it's suspicious, and somebody can come by and say, hey, could you step over here for just a second? Can we see some ID? As opposed to checking every single person. So this could be way more efficient.
Yeah, and you get to the point too where I think people are starting to become more comfortable with technology, just because we get to much of the same when we talk about the privacy versus the reward trade-off. A lot of the privacy is already lost in the sense of the moment you step through the airport, right? So when you're already starting with that level of assumption, it's one of those things where it, in a way, gets better because it's not a human profiling you. So I think personally, quite a fair number of people would prefer being profiled by a machine than by a human. when we talk about bias and the reasons for being profiled, they're picked out from a crowd. Um, to a certain extent, you might feel more comfortable with a quote impartial computer algorithm doing it. Now, of course, the world's famous question is how does the biometric algorithm not become like the fake news algorithm and start showing me preferential content? I think that's again same real world risk, is we don't have a good test harness for knowing when we are getting out of our own constraints of bias. But I think the mitigating factor here when it comes to the airport security is the data retention. So short-term data retention is always a key discriminator for ensuring that you can't take long-term advantage of those patterns and trends. So I'm actually quite pleased with the direction we're going with technology like this, because I think it's at the point where we need to get it out there and see whether or not it sinks or floats. I do think it will long term lead to, again, more automation in jobs where we've done a lot of staffing up. Like TSA is a hugely staffed organization. I think you'll start to see staff attrition over time as computers can more and more do the profiling tasks that are done by agents right now.
Well, it's no different than on the road when they flag a truck.
Yeah.
All these trucks go by, and it's like you can keep going, you can keep going. You need to pull over. And how much faster could it be if it's a verified? If we can get to the point where they're verified, I imagine there always need to be some spot checking of some type. What you think, just to make sure the computer hasn't lost its mind. But anyways, if it can get it right, then let those people go through the gates faster. And I can't complain too much. Omaha is really a 45-minute airport regardless. Like, I show up I literally get in the building 45 minutes ahead of time, and I'm 25 minutes too early. So we have such a great airport, and it's super efficient, and it works out really, really well. It's the other cities that I have problems with. And actually, to be honest, I flew out of Reagan all the time, and I never struggled there. I guess you kind of figure out how to get through the right places, but I haven't really struggled with lines. Now, go to Denver. That's a completely different story. So some of those high traffic airports, there could be some, Christian, if we can get time savings for travelers, nobody's going to care, because it's such a nightmare today. And the average traveler just wants to get in and get out, and they'll sacrifice privacy all day long to get that done. And so I think this is a slam dunk. If they can do it and do it reliably and get it in, I can't imagine. Okay, stand in line for 45 minutes or stand in line for 3 minutes. Okay, I'll take the 3 minutes. You can get as much. This was the premise of the Easy Pass, right? You basically gave up everything. You basically got a super reinforced background check so that you could save 3 minutes, maybe in some cases, maybe as much as 30 in the security line. You'd have to go through the common folks. Again, sometimes that Easy Pass line is in Omaha. It's longer than the it's longer than the regular line.
Yeah, absolutely. And it reminds me of another more popular technology that's coming out in airports that people are actually buying into is, are you familiar with Clear?
Yeah, I've seen that at Reagan. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's, a very similar concept to PreCheck, except you pay them some inordinate amount of money per year so that it's basically fingers and face, and you walk up to the terminal and very little interaction with TSA or otherwise to get through security.
Right.
I have never found I travel fairly often, and it has not been my experience that someone who's paying all this money for Clear has beat me with PreCheck. But, that's just,
everybody said, as much as I was flying, everybody was like, why don't you get the pass? And I'm like, I'll be honest with you, where I go, I just don't struggle with those. But it is a struggle. It is real. I don't want it to, I don't want to get your angry emails like, oh, in Philly or whatever. Because it is a struggle, and it is real. And I don't know. I just haven't, the routes I fly, it just hasn't been that bad. I do, and I am continually frustrated with the boarding process, which is just Oh my, could we find a harder thing to do and make it even harder? And if we could get better at that and get folks on the plane, I'm not sure checking them in any faster fixes it. Like the whole side of the airplane needs to open up like it's a ride at Disneyland, and people come in from the sides, and then the plane closes and they lock it. I mean, how great would that be?
Yeah, be pretty great. But it's not even only airports where. So couple theories on this. One, people become more comfortable with the ease of use and the kind of express life, the express lane. But I think where people will start to get angry for a while is in the job cuts, and they're not here now, but because everything's in pilot mode, but they are coming in a massive way. I predict it. Well, I predict the size of the TSA workforce will be cut in half within 10 years.
Hmm.
And that will just be as more technology ramps up and replaces these folks. But people have built entire business models around guaranteeing that they cut out their workforce. Biggest example is how AI is cutting into the taxi market, right? So for years, Uber and Lyft, it was all about we have to burn through a bunch of investor capital funding to pay a bunch of drivers to drive people around cities and do all of the things, right? Um, and that was all well and good, but now they know that they're not profitable as long as they're paying drivers, but they're very profitable as soon as that goes away. So when I was out at Vegas this summer for DEF CON and I opened my Lyft app to get a ride, guess what? I got offered a self-driving car. And so they have a fleet of, I think up to, I don't know how many cars they have enabled with it now, but they've done over 5,000 self-driving rides for Lyft as of recent, and no fatalities, accidents, or otherwise so far. But they will be limited by local laws and state laws as people become familiar. They're kind of at the mercy of government deciding that we're okay with the whole self-driving car service thing. But if that button does get pressed, guarantee you there will be no such thing as, oh, I'm a Uber or Lyft driver anymore, right? Huge economy right now. They started by gutting the traditional taxi market, and a lot of those taxi cab drivers moved over into just being their own full-time Lyft or Uber driver. And then AI will take a giant cut to that by as federal, local, state laws start catching up with these technologies. It's written in the business plans of these companies that they are going to get rid of their predominant crowdsourced workforce, more or less. And I mean, the way Lyft, Uber drivers are paid, they're independent contractors, they're not employees, right? So a lot of those types of short-term and or independent 1099 type job positions in our economy are going to start dwindling as the AI enabled solutions really start ramping up. I think it's much more imminent with stuff like the car industry than it is with maybe TSA right away. But the trend is very clear that we're actually, I think 2018 is the first year where I can, say with some level of crystallization that, yeah, we're starting to move in a direction where people are going to need to become more suitable for different types of economies and different types of jobs very soon, because we're starting to see things that had short term opened up a lot of jobs for folks. It's going to shift again within a few years.
Kind of interesting that when Uber tried to do this, they had that accident in Arizona, I think back in the spring, killed that person. And then of course they shut the program down. They're not testing in Arizona anymore, right? And I think they're going to move to a different location. But it's interesting how sensitive we are to that, especially with technology. I can't imagine the number of people who died in cars the early years of automobiles when there were no seatbelts, glass was single pane, there was no safety. I mean, Christian, it had to be enormous And if we would have taken the same approach then as we do now, we would have had automobiles. We'd have, nope, too dangerous. They kill people. Well, so they do have a little bit, I think, of a tougher hill to climb because of the sensitivity of the public to those kinds of things. And so it could be a little slower road to hoe to get there. I mean, it may take a bunch of time, and it's never going to be perfect. I mean, it's always, when you're taking a very calculated system and a very uncalculated system and you're jamming them together, the humans are the problem. And again, we get back to Skynet. The humans are the problem at the end of the day. They're the ones that eventually cause most of the problems by being unpredictable, and the system that controls it can't control it, and so it can't predict it and what the human's going to do. So I think we've got still some rough road ahead, no pun intended, to get self-driving vehicles working. When last time he was here at Gallup, we were talking about self-driving vehicles, and he goes, the problem's not the vehicle, the problem's the damage that the humans do to the vehicle when they're on the inside of it. They feel like there's nobody there, there's no driver, they can just vandalize it. And he said in some of the early testings of some of the other areas, these cars would come back just vandalized.
Yeah.
And so they're going to have to kind of overcome that issue as well, don't you think?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think they're probably going to go around to local governments that are favorable to them being long term. And eventually, when they do kind of stabilize out and become more and more trusted, the people who originally said no are going to have to flip. More interesting will be the societal experiment of when people are then told they are no longer allowed to drive their own cars and a computer must drive it for them. I expect full on rebellion at that point, because there's plenty of people who still want to drive their own car. So gets very interesting. It's for years I've always thought, we've had the technical ability to, for example, limit cars from going over a certain speed limit, right? Like if we wanted to stop all quote reckless driving, we could easily require by law that no car can go over 80 miles an hour or whatever the highest posted speed limit is in the country, right? But no one has ever gone close to seriously getting any kind of movement behind that, right? So if we're that reluctant to put in those kinds of protections with vehicles, I can't imagine what that looks like when it comes time to, hey, turn over the keys to the robot.
Yeah, especially in America.
Yeah. Oh, especially.
Yeah.
Huge car enthusiast community. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be interesting. Well, I think that'll be an interesting one to watch over the next 20 years. I think it's going to take a ton of time to get it worked out.
Yeah.
I was kind of hoping we'd see it in my lifetime. I'm kind of doubting it, like a full-fledged. By the way, today I would completely turn my car over. If I knew I could call a car, it would be here at the time I need it. It would take me where I want to go, and I wouldn't have to drive. And it would do it more efficiently. I'm in. Like I couldn't. I'm making the hour trip out to Lincoln now on Mondays.
Mm.
And I could get a lot of work done an hour out and an hour back. I mean, I've now created probably not as bad, but time wise, a DC commute is what I have on Mondays. And I would love to just get work done in the car. Great connectivity the whole way there and the whole way back. That hasn't always been true, but it is now. Man, I'd be done. I don't need, and if I could call a truck and it would haul crap away for me, even better. Like I think that would be an automate. Well, maybe that's the next service somebody needs to come up with, is an automated trash hauling service that call the truck. It'll be parked in the driveway on the morning. You wake up in the morning and it's sitting there. Spend your Saturday filling it up with whatever. It drives itself away at night.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think for big portion of people, I think they would easily concur with that assessment. But there's also a big portion of people that are like, no, thank you.
No, right on. I'd also like that to be we've talked a lot on Home Gadget Geeks about robot lawnmowers. And I don't actually want to own one of those things, but I might pay a service where that thing would drive itself over to my house and just mow and then drive on to the next person. And but and it be completely autonomous. Like that wouldn't be such a bad thing if it could make its way over. So I think there's some real interesting things in the service industry that we could, before we have to shuttle people, we could shuttle services pretty efficiently, and I think pretty effectively, and keep it. You talk about taking costs out. Be a great way to, take costs out of the system. Christian, you have an update on Google Authenticator.
Yeah, so just a wind down from the DEF CON updates, I finally got a chance to turn on the authenticator tokens, both the Fishian and the FIDO U2F token, and pretty happy with it. The Google team was able to natively integrate the hardware-based tokens with the Apple iOS mail client, which I was super surprised that they did that, because they always try and get you to download the Gmail app onto your phone. So was really pleased that they got native integration for the hardware-based token, because keep in mind, one of the big things that happens when you go into hardware is the hardware based two-factor for Google takes away all of your third party app codes. So like if you have two-factor that's based on text messaging or the Duo app, you can get a special app code basically for stuff like Microsoft Outlook and so forth to connect. So basically, I'm at the point where the only thing I don't have working in the new high security mode of Google is my Outlook client can't connect, because basically IMAP has no ability to do that type of two-factor, and I don't have the ability to generate an app token to log in. So kind of all around, it's going to be difficult for me to reconcile that one, because I do use Outlook quite extensively for mail accounts. So haven't figured out that piece yet. It might involve me forwarding off to other accounts. That makes it easier to redigest it into Outlook. I haven't quite decided what I'm doing there yet, but by and large, for the average consumer, not bad. I think they will do what they can to integrate with whatever open source mail clients are available, because I think that's the biggest use case out there. Now, the Apple client is, closed source. Obviously, it's through Apple. So there's a part of me that hopes and holds out for the day where they get a similar deal done with Microsoft for Outlook, but I don't know if that day is coming.
Of course, you can use for Outlook, you can use Microsoft's Authenticator, right?
Well, if you want to log into their Outlook service, yes. But
Yeah.
if you want to download your Google Mail into
Gotcha.
the Outlook software, not
Gotcha.
not the email.
Gotcha. I'm tracking with you. So
Yeah, cool.
And then another vulnerability out there we need to know about.
Yeah, last one. Just kind of like a closing anecdote, I suppose. The everyone kind of wanted to know, how did the whole Equifax breach happen? It's been a year since the Equifax breach happened, so I figured it was kind of appropriate to bring it back up. The actual original way that Equifax got hacked to no end is through a bug in the Apache server for basically a module and feature of the server called struts, Apache struts, which is basically a quite common framework used within Apache. And so just a word to the wise for anyone who still hasn't dealt with these version updates. If you're using Apache struts, like, make sure you did that patch. Quite a long time ago that the original vulnerability disclosure came out. So hopefully you did it, but not as applicable to the average guy, but much more of like hey, we made it to 1 year of Equifax screwing up. And what do we have to show for it? Honestly, not that much. Equifax, I think, went away from this pretty unscathed. No major changes to how we do tri-state credit bureau reporting occurred. No changes in data requirements or data disclosure occurred. It was kind of what I anticipated, which was we'll slap 1 year fraud protection for anyone who signs up for it. And after that, back to business as usual. So they have succeeded yet again in using that run book to get out of a PR crisis. So
John asked a question in chat. Do you have to patch all the apps that were created with struts, not just the struts itself?
No, my understanding is that it's a module that hits off the server. So don't take me for word there, because I'm not 100% on that. But I believe if it's loaded like most Apache security modules, or just Apache modules in general, you update the module basically, not the code framework.
All right. We doubted we had an hour worth of content. We're a little short, but I think we're right at 50 some minutes. So I think rather than push it, we'll call it good. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Sounds good. We'll remind everyone. First, thanks for listening. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and do that. It's a good way. We are pretty, Christian and I are pretty sporadic in getting this out. We kind of do it when we have time to do it. It's a little more difficult. Christian's gotten pretty busy. I'm just sitting around waiting for Christian. Sometimes I cry on Monday nights when he's not here, but we'd love to have you subscribe. So get that done as well. So subscribe, rate, review, follow, all those fun things that you need to do to make sure you get in the podcast. If you're not getting it automatically, figure out you're an IT professional. Figure out the right way to get this thing done and get it subscribed to. Don't forget theaverageguy.tv, powered by Maple Grove Partners. And the guest 750 said maybe there's some improvements coming at Maple Grove Partners. I don't know who 750 is out there, but he seemed to allude to something going on. I don't know what it is. Maybe we should do a show around that, Christian. Yep. Powered by Maple Grove Partners. Get secure, reliable, high-speed hosting from people that you know and you trust. Of course, for information on plans out there, get them as little as $10. It's the best value, I think, out there. Get it taken care of. MapleGrovePartners.com. And of course, if you have questions, comments, or contributions, if you'd like to have Christian wax eloquently on a topic that you choose, send him an email, Christian@theaverageguy.tv. You can send it to me. I'll just forward it to Christian. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter @BoardWhisperer, and I'm at Jay Collison. John and guest 750, the very anonymous guest 750. We appreciate you guys coming out here tonight. We'll do it again in a couple weeks, or whenever we get it pulled together. And with that, we'll say goodnight.
Good night.